Hey there, good to see you. I wanted to tell you today about something that happened to me a few years back that was completely, transformational in terms of how I started to see choices that I was making in my life. I was sitting in my office. I work for a big labor union here in Canada, and I'd been at that job for well over a decade at this point, and it was a good job. It had great benefits and pay and a pension waiting for me at the end. Everything that I've been taught was what a responsible man should do, find that long-term job and stick with it. But the thing is, I felt really empty, like I was sleepwalking through my days. Maybe you can relate to that. The weird thing is I was literally advocating for this kind of job security for the members we represented and fighting for this idea of a job with a pension and the promise of that lifetime kind of commitment. And I believed in it. Hell, I thought I was entitled to it, for crying out loud. But somewhere deep down, I started to feel like, yeah, something's wrong here. And if you're watching this, chances are you might be feeling something similar around your position, your job at the moment. Maybe the success you have on paper or in your community doesn't feel all that right. It might feel like you're actually living someone else's life. And maybe you're making choices that might have made sense 10, 20 years ago, but they're not fitting with you today. You might be conscious of this or unconscious of it. You might recognize it on some level. So today I want to talk to you about something I'm going to call the living from past programming instead of your present choices reality, and why it might be the invisible force that's kind of steering your life in directions that you're not actually choosing. Yes, how freaky is that? Hopefully you'll like this. You can like, share, subscribe, do all those amazing things. Great. So let me ask you something to begin with. When you made your last major career decision, whose voice was really making that choice in your head? I bet if you think about it, that voice was probably not your own. I tell you whose voice was mine at the time. It was my dad's. It was also my grandfather's. Every man in my family had drummed into me this idea about a good job, security, that equals success, and that's what you strive for. That you find that job and you stick with it and you don't take too many risks, because that would be an irresponsible thing to do now, wouldn't it? So I had that grilled into me. And here's what I've learned working with guys like us, you and me. We're not really making choices based on who we are today, who we've become. We're making choices based on programming we inherited decades ago, even from the time we were kids. So think about it. The decision to stay in a safe job, what's that all about? That might be your father's or your grandfather's fear of the depression talking, right? That might be your father's fear of the economic crashes that we had in the 1970s. The reluctance to have difficult conversations with your wife. Here's another thing. That could be your childhood strategy of avoiding conflict when your parents fought. So there's a lot of things, a lot of programming that happens in our lives that we don't even question. I remember this one client, I'll call him Mark, successful attorney, wonderful family, beautiful home, but miserable. The dude was miserable. Turns out he never wanted to be a lawyer. He did not want to practice law, but his goal as a young person was to get into teaching, because he felt this idea of teaching, helping people grow was really where he wanted to be. But his father, who was a teacher, discouraged that, because he didn't feel that it was the best financial path. Mark absorbed that message that teaching wasn't a real career for a man who wanted to be successful and to provide well for his family. So some mid-40s, and he is still looking at choices and stuck in this position based on stuff that he learned through his father and his father's experiences in the 80s and 90s. And this is typical, right? Here's the thing that really gets me. Most of us don't even realize we're doing this. And I want you to be reflecting on that notion as I move through this content. We think we're being rational. We think we're being responsible. We even think we're being very mature. But we're actually operating from a collection of inherited beliefs that we've never really questioned. They're just internalized. You know what happened to me in my union job? I got really comfortable, too comfortable, truth be told. And the work became quite routine, predictable. I could do it very easily. Honestly, some days I felt like I was just sleepwalking through it all. The passion that I once had for doing that type of work, for working to represent workers' rights, etc., was replaced by me just showing up in autopilot. Not great. That's the real danger, I guess, of living from past programming. It doesn't just limit our choices, it numbs us. So we stop growing, we stop challenging ourselves, we stop becoming who we're ultimately meant to be. We get lost. And the scariest part of all is that time doesn't wait. You know, while we're busy living by someone else's script or rules, life keeps going by. And maybe it's not the life that you're supposed to be living that's passing you by. So what does this look like in real life? Well, let me paint a picture, because I bet you'll recognize some aspect of these patterns that I'm going to lay out for you. There's a guy, let's just say, who stays in a corporate job he hates because, well, that's the responsible thing to do. That's what fathers do. They're responsible. He has kids who are grown and his wife is making good money. He's still operating on this mindset, this ethos from somewhere in the last century, that this is what masculinity looks like. This is, you stick to it. Or there's the man who avoids starting his own business because he failed at it some time ago. Maybe 20 years ago, he tried something that didn't work out. So he's making decisions and choices today based on experiences and capabilities from 20 years ago, circumstances that are no longer relevant or real. I see this all the time, men who choose houses in their neighborhoods that are going to impress others, their neighbors, instead of what's really going to make their family happy. Men who work 60 hours a week, not because they love their work so much, but because somewhere along the way, they learned that the worth of a man is putting in hard, long hours for a paycheck. And here's a big one too, relationship patterns. I've worked with men who are unconsciously creating their parents' marriage. The emotional distance, the lack of real communication, the assumption that the woman will handle the emotional side of the things and I'll look after the practical stuff. They're not even choosing this dynamic. They're simply operating in default mode. That's what they grew up seeing, and it was internalized. Programming, if you will. Let me tell you about my own wake-up call. I was having coffee with a friend who had actually quit his government job to become a full-time yoga instructor. We had done our training at the same time. I was thinking, wow, that's irresponsible. How are you going to do this and raise a family? He had small kids. But then I realized something too, that I'd been practicing yoga for years at that point, and it was the one thing in my life that I really felt truly alive about and truly present when I was doing it. I'd even started teaching a few classes on the side, but I never considered it as anything more than kind of a hobby, really, because, well, do real men teach yoga? That was kind of what I was thinking. And that's when it hit me that I was living by the rules that I didn't set up for myself. Rules that, security is more important than fulfillment. It was deeply internalized in me. Rules that said you can't change direction after your 40s. Rules that said following your passion is something you do on weekends or later in retirement, not something you do or build your life around. This programming runs deep in us, and it shows up in how we handle stress. Do we shut down and withdraw like our fathers did? It shows up in our money decisions. Are we still trying to prove that we're not like that uncle who went bankrupt, for example? It shows up in our relationship with our kids. Are we pushing them into that safe choice because that's what you're supposed to do? That's where you're supposed to push them. And here's what's really insidious about all of this. It's the programming that it masquerades as wisdom. So all of this internal programming we've got, we think that this is wise, right? We tell ourselves we're being mature, realistic, and responsible, but really? We're just scared to step outside of that box. that's been built for us, and to live outside of these rules that have been created by someone else in a different time. The world your father grew up in, where you could work for a company for 35, 40 years, retire and get a pension, that world doesn't really exist anymore. The rules have changed incredibly, but somehow we're still kind of operating by that old playbook. What is the cost to all of this? It's not just about career satisfaction, which is huge. A lot of us who stay in those careers, we're just numbed out. When we live with past programming instead of present choice, we teach our kids to do the very same. So we're replicating this model. We model a design of resigned acceptance rather than engaged living. Resigned acceptance rather than engaged living. We become examples of what happens when you stop choosing and you just exist. All right, so how do we break from this? How do we break out of these patterns, this stuff that's been programmed into us? How do we start making choices based on who we are today rather than what someone else programmed for us a long time ago? First, you have to become aware of the programming. And that's what this discussion is all about. And I mean really aware. Like, start paying attention to the voice in your head when you're making decisions. Any decision, big or small. Whose voice is it really? Who's making that decision? So here's an exercise that I like to share with my clients. Next time you're facing a decision, big or small, ask yourself, if I had no one else to impress, no one to disappoint, no past failures to avoid, what would I choose? If I had no one to impress, no one to disappoint, no past failures to avoid, what would I choose? If you ask yourself those questions, you might be surprised at the answers you come up with. For me, for example, the breakthrough came when I started questioning everything. Every should that popped into my head, I would ask, according to who? And is that person's situation even relevant to my life today? Like, if it was my dad's voice saying, you should do this. It's like, well, your situation was different, sorry. The voice that said I should stick with that secure job, that was my grandfather's voice for sure. And it was shaped by the Great Depression, where there was so much privation that people experienced for an entire decade. But I'm not living through the Great Depression. This was the mid-2010s, and it wasn't the time of the Depression. There were different opportunities, different challenges, and different possibilities. Second, start small. You don't have to quit your job. And I wouldn't recommend that anyway. Don't quit your job tomorrow to become a yoga instructor. I actually tried going half-time for a while and increasing my yoga instruction. And even I find that was too out of balance. So don't do that, but make small choices that reflect, where you're at today and not who you were programmed to be. Maybe it's finally having that conversation with your boss about that project you actually are excited about that hasn't been assigned to you. Maybe it's signing up for a class about something you've been thinking about, maybe exploring more, or learning more about some practical skills, whatever it may be. Maybe it's about telling your wife how you actually feel instead of what you think you should be saying. For me, it started with expanding my yoga teaching. So just one extra class, that was in the initial bit of it. But that one class did remind me that it felt really wonderful and engaging to be present, to be doing something that really mattered to me. It was like waking up from a long sleep. It felt so good. The third thing I would recommend, and I think this is really crucial, is you need to get comfortable with disappointing others. And a lot of us aren't very good at that. We can get a little bit into people-pleasing mode. And I know that may sound harsh, but here's the truth. You probably are already disappointing someone, right? And you're living with this past programming. So guess who you're really disappointing? Yourself. So the fear of disappointing others is often what keeps us trapped in these patterns. What I've learned is most people you're trying not to disappoint don't actually give a hoot about you. They've got their own issues and concerns. And the ones that do care, they actually want what's best for you to be happy and for you to have the success that you want, but not in an outdated model. Here's another thing, the fourth thing, find what lights you up, what makes you feel most like yourself. This is hard for a lot of us because we've just gotten into this autopilot way of being. For me, it was the yoga thing, and eventually that led to coaching. For you, it might be something completely different, but you have to give yourself that permission to explore. You have to take it seriously too, and see where it leads. Give it a go, give it a run. The programming tells us that our passion should just be hobbies, that real work is supposed to be hard and it's not fulfilling. It's not what it's about. But what if that's not true? What if the thing that energizes you the most is actually pointing towards the next chapter in your life? And finally, I invite you to get support. This stuff is hard to see through, to navigate through on your own, because frankly, you're too close to it. So you find a coach like me, or maybe a therapist or a men's group, something and someone who can help you see those blind spots and support you as you start making these different choices. I remember the day I finally decided to transition from my union work into coaching, and it was a bit terrifying because everything in my programming was screaming that I was being irresponsible, that I was throwing away security for some pipe dream. But you know what? I realized I had a choice. I could access my pension in the earliest possible date, or I could stay for another 10 years of what would be, frankly, pure drudgery. The security of those extra 10 years felt like a prison sentence, and I was not going for it. I was dying inside, little by little, every day. So I chose not to stay in that role. It no longer fit. It no longer was who I was becoming. So what if you actually did this? What if you started making choices on sort of the present awareness of who you are, not past programming? Let me tell you what I've seen happen with men I work with who make this shift. First, they become more alive. There's an energy that comes to life because of this authentic living that you can't fake and you can't get from external achievements. When you're making choices that align with who you actually are and you show up differently in all aspects of your life, that's pure gold. I think of Tom, a client who had been in finance for 20 some years. He hated it. He stayed in it because his father had told him that that's what good men do. That's what smart men do. And when he finally gave himself permission to explore what he actually wanted, he discovered a passion for woodworking. He started a weekend hobby thing of doing this woodworking, and then a little side business. And then today it's his main source of income. He doesn't make as much money as he did in the finance world, but he does have a wife, for example, who says it's like being married to a different person, a much better person. So think of that. Second, your relationships will improve. So when you stop living from programming, you stop expecting others to fit into your internal patterns and these preconceived notions of what things are supposed to look like. You can see them for who they are, not for who they need to be to fit into that old story. I've seen some marriages completely transform when men stop trying to be the provider, that role. Their partner never even asks them to play, and start being the partner that they actually want. They want to be, and their partner wants them to be. Someone who's present, someone who's engaged, someone who's following their own path, which is so admirable. Third, you get to become a better role model. Your kids, if you have them, they get to see what it looks like to live consciously, to make choices on values rather than fear, to break cycles of inherited limitation. But here's what must be the most important thing. You start to trust yourself. For years, maybe even decades, you've been in this mode of making decisions based on these external rules, these other people's expectations that were given to you, imposed upon you. And when you start making choices for your own center, from your own inner place, you develop a confidence and you own it. You own it. You own that judgment. You realize that you can handle uncertainty, which is hard. Those regular paychecks or heading to that job every day, that provides you with a certain level of certainty, right? Regardless of how much it impacts you on so many other levels. Now you can handle that uncertainty. You can handle the opinions of others. You can handle the possibility of failure because you're finally living your own life. Wow. Not trying to live up to someone else's version of what success is supposed to look like and following a set of rules. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. This isn't always easy. There will be moments when the old programming is going to kick you in the butt and question everything that you're doing. There will be people who won't understand why you're changing. There might be financial uncertainty, or even some of your relationships might be challenged. But here's what I want you to know for sure is that the cost of not doing this work is so much higher. There's a cost to inaction, the cost of spending the rest of your life wondering, what if? The cost is modeling resignation instead of courage. The cost is never knowing who you might have become if you had had the courage to choose yourself. So you're not too old to make change, to change your direction. You're not too invested in your career path to explore other options. You're not too responsible to pursue what actually might matter to you. The men I work with who make this transition, they don't regret it. None of them. They might regret waiting so long, though. But they never regret finally choosing to live from present awareness instead of programming. Your life is happening for you right now. Not when you retire, not when the kids graduate, not when there's enough money saved, right now. The question is, are you going to live it? Or are you going to keep following that script that's been given to you? It's a choice. It's your choice. And for maybe the first time in a long time, you can actually act on that and make that choice. If this resonates with you at all, if you're starting to see ways how past programming might be running your life, I want you to know, please know this, that you are not alone. This is the work of midlife, this questioning, this deeper inquiry that we start doing, looking at what we inherited and choosing what we can actually do differently that will serve us better. Drop a comment below and let me know, what's the one area in your life where you suspect you might be living from an old programming instead of your own choice? And let's start that conversation. And if you're ready to dive deeper into this work, check out the link below for a Midlife Clarity call. I'd love to have that conversation with you. Sometimes just a little bit of support can help you to see more clearly where you are than you can see on your own. Until next time, remember, you get to choose. You've always gotten to choose. Maybe it's time to choose a little bit differently. See you soon.